Okay, so I'm going to start. I am recording this. I apologize. I don't have, I usually have a microphone attached to myself that'll probably give you better sound, but you still should be able to wade through this. You should still hopefully be able to hear it. I'll stay close. So I want to talk a little bit about color theory. If you've got a computer open, go ahead and start up Photoshop for me really quick, please. There's no reason to wait. How many people in this room feel like they have a good foundation in color theory, a good understanding of color? Yeah, some of you guys who've been through my class before, you've seen this, so you're going to see it again. I apologize. I'm going to make this as brief as I possibly can, but for those of you who have not gone through this, you need to. And so it's just one of those unavoidable things. But like I said, I'm going to try to make it as fast as I possibly can. So we're going to start with the discussion about tri-stimulus color. Don't let that word scare you. It simply means that there's 3 stimuli that build color. RGB would be 3 different stimuli. CMY without K. K stands for black right now. We'll talk about why K has to exist. But right now, we don't need to worry about that part of it. Let me move my computer down just a little bit for me. That'll probably give it a little better sound. Anyway, okay. So this was an experiment that was actually done 300-400 years ago, I don't know, whenever they did this. And it was an effort to really try to establish how human vision works in terms of perceiving color. And so what they did in this experiment, what you'll see is that you've got essentially a white screen on the left-hand side. There's a shelf coming out of that screen, a black shelf that's right in the middle. Underneath that shelf is a target color. It's just sort of that purpley, lilac-y kind of color. And it's shining on the area of the white screen of the wall underneath the shelf, but none of the color can spill over into the top part. Then on the top part, there's a red light, a green light, and a blue light, and they have rheostats attached to them. And rheostats are basically just dimmers. So they can use dimmers to either increase the amount of red or decrease the amount of red, and they can do the same for the green and the blue. And by adjusting those things, whatever, they tested whether the person who is looking through the masking screen, whether he can actually get the color on the top to match the color on the bottom. And when he does, it ends up looking like this. And they, in doing so, they actually established the fact that you could recreate any single target color using varying amounts of red, green, and blue. This whole thing was based on how human vision works. Your eyes actually have cells in them that are sensitive to red, green, and blue light perspective uniquely. So, and it's what allows you to see actual color. So they came up with a system, and we call them the additive primaries. We're going to talk about both additive and subtractive. So in an additive primary system, you start with red, green, and blue are the primary colors, and you can see that's the colors that are out here on the outside. These guys that sit on the border. This is the red one, the green one, and the blue one. Where those colors crisscross is where you get your secondary colors. So cyan, magenta are the secondaries. So if you look at the area where the green and the blue combine, not in the very center. In the very center you have white. We'll talk about why that is in just a second. But where they combine on this edge over here, you actually end up getting cyan. Where the red and the blue combine right here, you get magenta. Where the red and the green combine, you actually get yellow. Where they all 3 overlap together at its maximum intensity, you get white. It is an emissive system, so a monitor would be a perfect example of an emissive system. A projector is another example of an emissive system. And in an emissive system, what happens is you start with black. You start with absolutely no light at all. So if anybody's got a monitor, like one of these monitors right here, that doesn't have anything on it, yeah, like this one, that's black. You start with nothing, right? And then you start to add energy to it. Additive. You start with black. You start to add energy to achieve color. So if you add proportions of any RGB, you can achieve any color. Equal amounts, and this is huge. This is really important for us in Photoshop. This is how we just did the color balancing in Photoshop. Remember I said if you use that color picker and you stick it on something and you click it, what it tries to do is adjust the color of your image such that the point that you picked has equal amounts of RGB. Now, if that happens to be a neutral gray in real life, then you actually achieve perfectly neutral color in your image. So equal amounts of RGB equal gray, and then white are equal amounts of RGB at the maximum intensity. So how black is black? What sets your black point? That's what we would call it. Again, is this monitor plugged in? Okay, well, I'll just put it over here. So I need everybody to look at this monitor. This is as black as this monitor can be. Is this as black as this monitor can be? How can I get it blacker? Yeah, turn off the lights. The environment, the room that you have got, and your screen are what establishes your black point. Your environment, when you are actually working in the studio, when we work in the studio, whatever, if we are trying to make serious color judgments based on this, we would kill all of these overhead lights. If you can't do that, if you're working in a studio that's got a whole lot of available light flooding into it, what a good digital tech or a good assistant will do is they will build a little fortress out of foam core to put their monitor in to kill as much of the available light as they possibly can. I've had assistants literally build little forts. They'll do a little box of foam core, they'll put a sheet of foam core over the top, black sides all around, not white sides, and then they'll crawl in there, and that's where they'll actually do their evaluation of color, because that sets your black point. So what sets your white point? The brightness of your monitor. That's something that we've got to control and lock down. So those are the two variables that we've got to deal with amongst a whole range of others. Does this make sense though? Yes.
So, but I mean, aren't you taking all the readings off of the card? So I mean, shouldn't it all be accurate?
The numbers tell you a lot. And yes, I was just in here demoing. Didn't this happen in this last class? I think last week or the week before. We shot a picture and I was like, Jesus, that's grossly underexposed. But it turned out that the monitor was just cranked way down. But the numbers told me exactly where I knew exactly where I should be. So yes, the numbers are reinforcement, but find me an art director who can look at the numbers and say, yeah, that's right where I want it to be. They're all dumb as shit. They want to see what? No, I can't imagine that in black and white. So you got to show it to them in black. You know, I always say this as a photographer. What do I really do? I turn a three-dimensional object into a two-dimensional one for a one-dimensional person. Subtractive primaries. They're actually, in many ways, you can think of them as the negative of RGB. In this case, it would be CMY. And in this case, what's happening is that CMY are the primaries in this. The secondaries are RGB. So if we think about this in terms of ink, which is primarily what CMY is, again, cyan, magenta, yellow, if you take just yellow ink and lay it down on a piece of paper, you get yellow. However, if you combine it with equal amounts of cyan ink, you achieve green. If you mix cyan and magenta ink, you get blue. If you mix magenta and yellow ink, you get red. If you mix the three of these together, theoretically, you get black. However, you don't in the real world. And it's not because the theory is flawed. It's because inks are flawed. Nobody has been able to come up with a pure enough pigment to actually have CMY work in a way that it really should. So to combat that, what they end up doing is CMY works really well sort of in the midtones and up. From midtones to the higher end to the highlight range, whatever, on their own, by themselves, they work actually pretty well, and they can achieve a reasonably good neutral gray if you mix the right amounts of them together. However, once you start getting into the darker tones, what we would call the three-quarter tones, down into the shadows and the blacks area, that kind of stuff, the inks are simply inefficient. They're just, they cannot get a pure enough ink to actually have this work. So what they do is they start removing equal amounts of CMY and replacing that with a legitimate black ink. And that's where K comes into this whole equation. So in this case, we start with white, and then you subtract proportions to achieve any color that you're trying to get, right? So different amounts of CMY with the combination of black as you start getting into those darker tones actually give you the color. So why is the label on this little bottle, why is the blue on here? Why do you see that as blue? What's happening? Why is it blue? Exactly right. So typically, white light has all the colors of the rainbow in it. White light, all of those colors are hitting this little blue label where it is blue. The label, the ink that's in this label, is absorbing all of the colors except for the sort of the bluish, cyanish color, that range. Those colors are not absorbed by the ink on here. They are reflected back to you, and that's why you see cyan. So if you look at Katie's sweater, the reason that you're seeing an orange in there is, again, the sweater is, the dye that is in that fabric is absorbing everything except for some red and some yellow, and those combined together are what give you that beautiful sort of rusty color. That's why you see it that color. So the way you think about this, or the way, again, the way an ink system works is it subtracts. That's why you see color. So you start with white. Equal amounts of CMY, unfortunately, do not equal gray. We'll look at that in just a second. And again, equal amounts of CMY at their maximum intensity do not equal black because of the inefficiency. So how white is white? What's the whitest you can get? Exactly, the piece of paper. It doesn't get any whiter than that. Then you start to add ink to it to subtract light that's bouncing off of it. When you look at a typical piece of white paper, especially printing paper used for an inkjet, they've actually got brighteners in them and all that kind of stuff. It returns somewhere in the neighborhood of the low 90% amount of light to you. You see, and you'll see a lot of papers, they'll actually rate it, how bright they are. It'll return 92% of the light that hits it, or 94% of the light that hits it. As you start to add ink to that, that ink starts absorbing light, and you do not get that part back. So as you start to get darker and darker and darker, less light is being reflected back. Also, you change the proportions of CMY that will actually change the color that is returned or reflected to you, and that's why you see different colors. In theory, if you get as dark as you possibly can get, you can get really, really dark ink, you know, on a inkjet piece of paper with a really intense ink hitting on there. You get on the order of right around 1% of the light is actually being returned to you. You'll never get to the point that you have nothing unless you take that print inside a black room and turn off all the lights. And then you don't see anything because there is no light at all. Make sense? So that's where the whole subtractive part of this comes up. I'm going to avoid this part right now. Everybody who's got Photoshop open, please, and I'm going to open up my version of it as well. Sorry, I should have had this open already. So if you've got Photoshop open, yours might look slightly different than mine. It doesn't matter what it looks like. I just want you to hit the D key, and what that does is it actually just defaults your foreground and background colors to black and white. And then I want you to click on the foreground color. If you don't know what it is, it's on the toolbar on the left-hand side, sort of down at the bottom. If you just click on that, it opens up what we call the color picker. And once you get the color picker open, if you would select the radio button right next to red, which is just R in here. If you click on the radio button, any of the radio buttons here inside this dialog box, the column right here becomes what that radio button is that you picked. So for instance, if you click on H, which stands for hue, this column becomes the hue slider. If you click on S, which stands for saturation, this is the saturation slider. But if we start with red, that I ask you to, you'll see on this slider that you actually have the possibles of red. Now in this case, hopefully you should be zeroed out. If you're not, go ahead, type in a 0 value for the R. If you hit the tab key, it'll advance you to the green, put a 0 in there too. Finally hit the tab key again and put a 0 in for blue. That just gives us a black. Again, black in Photoshop is defined as 0 red, 0 green, and 0 blue. Again though, with the radio button red selected, you can now click on the double-headed arrow that's at the bottom of that column, and as you start to drag it up, you will actually see the R value is changing. Green and blue are not changing at all. They remain fixed at 0. But as we start to go up the scale all the way up to the very top, by the time you get up to 255, you will see that a pure red is achieved when you get a value of 255, 0 green, and 0 blue. I often find that this color picker dialog box is a great place to go to if you're confused about certain terms and how certain terms are really working. So when you start to try to think about, and again, you guys you're pretty advanced in this game, in this group, but I just want to make sure everybody's on the same page and understands this, is that there are 256 possible tones of red, even though this says 255. Why is that? What's the 256th tone? 0. And 0, it's a hard concept to get, but you need to understand this is a concept. When you drag this thing down, you look at it and you say that that's a pure black. I look at it and say that is a black red, a black green, and a black blue. Those are all viable, possible colors. So it's not just an absence of red, it is a black red. Make sense? Okay. So you guys stay here. I'm going to jump back to the lecture really quick. Okay, and you can do the exact same thing for the green slider. Let me go back here with you one more time to actually see this whole thing at work. Remember, I said if you were to combine green, so go ahead and leave your red all the way cranked up to the top. But if you click on the green, I'm sorry, I'm going to crank my red. So I've got 255 red. If you click on the green slider and you drag it all the way up to the top, you get a pure yellow because, again, the perfect combination of maximum green and maximum red, those two together create yellow. If you then finally click on the blue slider and drag it all the way up, you've got the maximum intensity of all three colors. You end up with white. So this has given us our combinations, it's given us our primaries, it's given us our secondaries, and it's also given us everything in between. If you actually type in these values, if you go back to your red slider into the dialog box, just select it and type in 128. Hit the tab key and type in 128 for the green. Hit the tab key, 128 for the blue. You'll see that you end up with, in Photoshop, what is middle gray. Photoshop, you can't actually get a true middle gray in Photoshop. Why is that? Anybody? You've got 256 colors in Photoshop. What's half of 256? It's 127 and a half. You can't have that half. So you either get 127 or you get 128. Photoshop arbitrarily picked 128. Okay, stay in this dialog box for me if you will. All right, we've gotten through that. We've gotten through that. Okay, so back to what is tristimulus? So tristimulus is all the colors of the spectrum can be described in 3 values or stimuli. Human eyes are tristimulus. However, it does not have to be. Color does not have to be described only using these primary systems. It is 3, since there are 3 stimuli though, it can be plotted in 3 dimensions, and it looks like this. This is what we call a color space. When you think about color, in order to be able to describe not only all of color, but also the range from black to white, you need to do it in 3 dimensions. So if we imagine this as a room, you can actually imagine it. This isn't going to be a really good room to do this in, but we'll try for it anyway. So just imagine that we're just going to take this space right here in this little studio bay area right here. And let's say the width and the height and the distance out here are exactly the same. So it's a perfect cube. Does that make sense? That's what this is supposed to be an illustration of, but just to help give you something in physical space. So if you look at the lower left-hand corner, in your all's case, it would be the lower right-hand corner down here, it's where black exists. It's where you have 0, 0, 0. Then we have an axis. As you go along that back wall all the way up is our green axis. So if you stay in that corner and go straight up to the top, at the top you get 255 green, but you've still got 0 red, 0 blue. Make sense? So that's where pure green exists in that top corner there. If you go back down to the lower hand corner where we have 0, 0, 0, you're still at black. Now we're going to actually drag along the wall and we're going to come out to the lower left-hand edge over here. That's the red axis. So again, as long as you stay along the floor, you do that very same thing that we just did with that slider scale in red. You start at 0 red, you come all the way over here, you have 255 red. But that lower corner there, you have no green because green is up. And you have no blue because blue is out. Make sense? And then finally, blue is the final axis. If we go back to our original 0, 0, 0, and we slide along the floor out here, and we come out to this farthest corner here, so all the way to the right, but as far out as the wall goes or as the edge of this cube goes, is where our pure blue is. Again, we have no green because green is up. We have no red because red is in this direction over here. So what this allows us to do is plot color in this space. So in this system, where is white? Exactly, Katie's right. So white is this top corner over here because this top corner here, it's the top of the ceiling, so that's all the green. It's all the way out to this edge of the room, which is all the blue, and it's also all the way over here to the side over here, which is all the red. So that is, again, 255 green, 255 blue, 255 red. This is where white is. Where's middle gray? Middle gray is right here in the very center of the room. It's halfway out, it's halfway up, and it's halfway over. Make sense? As a matter of fact, the axis to go from all of our grayscale, the entire grayscale, starts in that lower corner and ends in this upper corner, and it does a straight line straight through this cube. That's where all my colors of gray are. Does that make sense? So you can also plot other color in here as well, but the advantage to this is that in this system right here, we are not using RGB or CMY. We actually get to use location to describe color. So in our case here, and I'm going to say, again, it doesn't have to be primaries. HSB, we're going to talk about what hue, saturation, brightness in just a second as a description of color. But it is, again, is 3 values, but they are not these primary values. But what we care about in this is that we are now describing color as location. Color is a location inside of this color space. So for instance, the color that we are looking at here is got a red value. It's a sort of like a kind of a lightish, not really light blue, sort of a middle bluish type of color. But it's these RGB values are specifying a location inside of this space. So if we look at the red value here, it's not, again, it's on the scale of 0 to 255. There's not that much red in here. It's about a quarter of it. So you think about here, this is the red axis is going here from this wall in this direction. Well, this color space, the color that we're picking right here, is not that much, it doesn't have that much red in it. If it was full red, it would all be all the way down in this part. But because of its location, it does not have that much red in it. As far as the amount of green in it, it's about in the middle of this scale. And you can see that green is at 153. It's about in the middle of it. 128 would be the exact middle of it. And then finally, blue. It's got a dominance of blue because blue, again, is this axis that's coming out here from the wall. So we're almost out to this outer edge, and that's why blue is the stronger, or it has is the most. It's more blue than it is anything else. But this is now all depending on. This is now we are talking about color in terms of space, not, hey, by the way, it's red or it's blue or it's whatever. This is now color as space. So I need everybody to go to their application folder. So go to the Finder, hit Command N to bring up a new window. You should have a readout on the side. Go to the application folder. Scroll all the way down to the bottom of the application folder. You should have a utilities folder in here. If you click on utilities folder, and then inside the utilities folder will be a color sync utility. I want you to double click on that to launch it. When it actually opens up, there's a series of icons that run along the top. Do not pick the first one, which is on by default, usually Profile First Aid. I want you to pick the one right next to it that just says Profiles. When you get to that, you should have in this box over here, it won't be exactly the same as mine, but it should be close to this. If you should have at least a system, if you click on the little drop-down triangle for the system, you should be able to see Adobe RGB in there. If you click on that, you will get a screen that you can actually put your mouse on and move around and see. This is the true three-dimensional Adobe RGB color space. And you will notice, just like the model we just talked about, depending on how you angle this thing, that you've actually got white and black opposite each other. If you think of this as a globe, think of it like the globe of the world, right? The North Pole would actually be white, the South Pole would be black. Around the equator would be our primary colors, and it would be the most saturated colors would be existing here on the outer edges. The less saturated colors would be more in the center of the Earth. In the exact center of the Earth, we should have neutral middle gray. Makes sense? So the reason all of this is important to us is that all the color models that we work with in a digital world are these three-dimensional color spaces, not a typical RGB, the way we think of a typical RGB space. So let me get back to this. Okay, so hue. What is hue? Color. Can you be more specific?
No specific color.
Okay. It's the property of pure color that distinguishes it from another. So if you look at these 7 patches that are right here along the bottom, these all have the exact same brightness and they have all the exact same saturation to them. The only thing that is different in these guys is the hue. It is what when we think of yellow. Yellow is a concept that clearly distinguishes itself from green or from red, and so that is the property that we think of as hue. It's also the property that's associated with wavelength, which it matters to us because in all of the calibration systems that we use, we're going to actually be using things that actually work with wavelength. This is saturation. What is saturation? Not quite. It ends up being a consequence, can be that, but not quite. It's the purity of the color. So what happens if you think of the color wheel? We're going to look at the color wheel in just a second. If you think about a color wheel, on the color wheel, you basically got a color, and straight across that color wheel is a complement of that color, and the complement is the opposite of the color. If you start to add complementary color to a pure color, it starts to lose its purity, and when you reach the point where you have equal amounts of complementary color and your original starting color, when they equal one another, you have actually completely neutralized it out, or you've completely desaturated the color, and it is no longer, it has no purity at all. It's no longer has any, it has no saturation, it's no purity at all. So in the case of what you're looking at here, all these are the exact same hue, they are all the exact same brightness. The only thing that is changing here is the purity of the color. So there's this, it's an orangish color over here. The opposite of that orangish color is probably something in the blue-green range. And as we start to add that complementary color, we start actually moving down to achieving a neutral gray. So it's the degree to which this thing appears. And so at one end, you've got the pure color. At the other end, you have neutral gray. If you have no brightness, it's black. If you've got middle brightness, it's a middle gray. If you've got ultimate extreme brightness, it's white. Okay, and then brightness, the last of the equations here. So in this case, the brightness on these, in this case, the saturation on these is identical, the hue is identical, the only thing that's changing here is the brightness. So the brightness is the property by which the color appears to have more or less light coming out of it. So at one extreme you have black, the other extreme you've actually got white. You can use brightness to adjust the colors in between the middle. And this is the example that I was just talking to you about. This is the color wheel. You'll notice that R is set at 0 degrees. Color wheels, all wheels in the world are 360 degrees. That's what you take to go. Everybody knows that, right? Does anybody not know that you have 360 degrees in a circle? You do, and the color wheel is no exception. And you'll see that in this case, what they've done, the construction of the color wheel, what they do is they set the primary colors, in our case RGB, as far from one another as they can possibly be, yet still be equal. So what you'll see is that they end up being at 120 degree increments. So if red is at 0, green is at 120, blue is at 240, and then you get back to red again. Red is not only 0 degrees, it's also 360 degrees because they land at the very same spot. In between the two, you'll actually get the secondary colors. So again, we talked about the addition of green and red put together equal yellow. Again, the addition of, if you combine cyan and magenta, you get blue. But what you'll also notice in our case right here is that cyan is the complementary color of red. So as you start to add amounts of cyan to red, you start drawing. Out here on the very edge is pure red. On the edge over here is pure cyan. As you start to add cyan to the red, the color actually starts to drift here. At the point where they actually equal, when you have a perfectly equal amount of cyan and red, you end up in the very center here with neutral gray. What's missing from this color wheel, though?
Black and white.
Exactly. I don't have any light tones or dark tones. So what you're looking at here is actually in our HSB model, hue, saturation, brightness model, we have hue in this. Hue is the property that's going around the outside. Red, green, blue, yellow, that's hue. Saturation is, again, the distance from the middle. The more I'm out here on the edges, the purer, the more saturated my color is. As I start moving into this direction here, what I'm losing in here is saturation. And when I hit in the exact middle, I've lost all saturation. My color is desaturated. If you desaturate an image in Photoshop, it becomes a grayscale image. So what's missing in this is brightness. So again, this is how the whole wheel was actually constructed. To deal with brightness, though, you need 3 dimensions. You need the 3rd dimension. The color wheel, what they do is they take the color wheel and they drop it on its side like it is a record disc on a record player. And again, around the equator of that record disc is the hue. As you start to move into the center of that disc is saturation. But now they've added the 3rd primary that was missing, brightness. And what happens in brightness is that you then go up and down as if, again, in my globe scenario, the North Pole to South Pole. Does that make sense? Why does this 2 cones? Why isn't this a cylinder? You're exactly right. As you start to move towards white, you lose saturation. As you start to move towards black, you lose saturation. So that the point, by the time you get to the very, very tip top point, you've actually achieved white. There is no saturation anymore. And the same thing happens as you go down to black. So, yeah, and you can think about it. Really saturated colors are sort of in that middle, and as they start to get darker and darker and darker, you actually start to lose, as they're getting darker, you start to lose saturation. So this is a three-dimensional space. Red, by definition, is at 0 degrees. Saturation is the distance from the center. Brightness is north to south. And this, you'll hear all of this all the time. HSB, HSL, HSL, HSV, all of these are variations on a theme. They are not identical, but they're close enough to at least looking at this model like this to see them as being, for the most part, the same. However, you cannot generate this directly. All of this is calculated from RGB. So again, I want you to go into the color picker one more time. So open up the color picker, and I'm just going to read what I want you to actually do in this. If you can set your saturation up to 100% and the brightness also up to 100%, that's the S and B values that are at the very top. You'll notice that they are in percentages. And then click on the radio button next to the H, which stands for hue, and type in 0. 0 degrees, by definition, we just saw this, is red. What's the halfway around a circle? If the circle's 360 degrees, what's halfway around it? 180 degrees, right? What's the opposite of red? The complement of red. No. Cyan, right? Type in 180 degrees. What do you get? 180 degrees in the hue value is what color? Cyan. Type in 120. What do you get? Type in 240. What do you get? You can look at your RGB values as well. They'll change. Blue, right? Again, exactly what the color wheel was telling us. So go ahead and put 0 back in for your hue to put it on 0 degrees. And then take your saturation slider and start to slide it, or click on the S button. That will leave it as red, will be your pure red. And then here, I'm going to jump out and do this with you guys. So let me get where you are. Okay, so if you click on the S button, this is what saturation looks like. And again, I've got 0 degrees in here, which is my red. I'm completely saturated 100%. But now I'm going to click and drop my saturation all the way down. Why did I end up with white and not middle gray? Exactly. My brightness is still at 100%. If I want middle gray, I have to click on my brightness and then drag it halfway down, and then that is middle gray. However, it's a middle gray based on a red color. It is a completely desaturated pure red, meaning it's not pure red anymore. It's completely desaturated, and I've only got half the brightness. Does this make sense, what's going on here? So the reason I point all of this out to you is that if you lose sight of HSB, if you forget, oh God, instinctively I know what saturation is, but I'm not really sure how brightness fits into this game, whatever. Come into this color picker right here. It's the controls are right there in front of you, and you can look at them and you can see. For me anyway, it's a great place to be because it sort of gives me instinctually, I get this, oh, this is, of course, this is what saturation is, how it works. Make sense? We good on that? Okay. We're moving on, and we got to be quick because we got a lot to do. All right, so that gets through all of that. So there's a problem in all of this, and the problem in all of this is it boils down to this. Every single RGB thing in the whole wide world, whatever, is what they call device dependent. Your eyes are device dependent. Your eyes do not see RGB the same way mine do. As a matter of fact, my left eye does not see RGB the same way my right eye does. Every single model that exists in the world, every computer monitor, every camera, all of those things are device dependent. They have a perception of RGB that is unique to them. And the problem that we then run into is that we need to be able to, when we talk about color, we need to get rid of that ambiguity. Does that make sense? So we need to develop a system, hopefully a system, that we can get rid of that part so that your monitor and your eyes are seeing the very same color that my monitor and my eyes are seeing, so that we're making those adjustments, so that when I give you a file, I can give it to you. I expect you to be able to see the exact same color that I'm seeing on mine. That's the goal in all of this, right? So somehow we need to come up with a system that eliminates the fact that every single one of these monitors is going to show us color in a different way, and every printer is going to print color in a different way, and every camera is going to actually shoot color in a different way. If we can come up with a system that gets rid of that, again, ambiguity, if we can get it locked down and consistent, then we have a consistent color managed workflow, which is what we're trying to go for right now. Make sense? Okay, so I'm going to get in here. So device-dependent color spaces. So again, we just talked about that. Again, what this all is. Okay, so the way we're going to get around this is using profiles. So profiles are data that represents the color reproduction characteristics of a device. So if I generate a profile for this monitor, what it's really doing is two things. Number one, it's measuring the characteristic of this monitor. You know, does this thing, is it sending me 2 saturated blues when I'm asking for a blue, or is it deficient in the reds? You know, it not only measures those characteristics, but then the profile that it generates actually eliminates that discrepancy. Does that sort of make sense? Okay, so that's going to be sort of what we're actually doing. The way these things work is this. It's always a hardware-software combination. You cannot calibrate with your eyeballs. Your eyeballs are very adaptive, so calibrating using your eyeballs, even though there's been systems forever that could allow you to do this, are bullshit. They're worthless. Don't even try to do it that way. It will never work. So what ends up happening is this. You take a piece of software that starts kicking out known colors on your device. You take a piece of hardware and you put it on that device and you measure the color that the device is showing you. Then if there's a discrepancy in the two, that is information is put into your profile. So, and let's just take a possible scenario here as a case. Let's say I want to profile my monitor. I put a piece of software in there and the monitor is calling for pure red, which is R255, 0 green, 0 blue. But so the software says, here's pure red, measure it. And the puck, or the hardware that's sitting on my monitor, measures it, and it comes back and it says, well, it's not really 250, it's not an R255, it's actually an R245, 0 green, 0 blue. So the monitor then, the profile, the software then says, okay, it's deficient in red. When he's asking for a pure red, the monitor's not giving it. It's 10R short. So what the profile then does is that every time, if I'm using it on my monitor, every time Photoshop asks for a pure red, the profile knows this, and the profile says, okay, it's only going to show him 245, so I'm going to add 10R to it. And when I add 10R to it, the monitor will kick out 255 red. And then the profile takes care of the deficiency of the monitor. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about this? Because if you get that concept, we can blast through the rest of this really quick. So are there questions about that? So let's say, for instance, in another case, it's asked, I'm going to do this on Ben's monitor. In his, it's asking for pure red, and his monitor gives me, it gives me an R of 255, but it also gives me a green of 10 and a blue 0. His monitor is actually also not giving me a pure red. It's got a little bit of green in there that it shouldn't have. So his profile would subtract the 10 green so that he too is getting a pure 255 red, no green, no blue. Does that make sense? So what you know about what ultimately is about profiles, what you have to realize about them is that you can only build them for one device. So for instance, Ben and I have the same computer. If we did, I cannot build a profile for mine and use it on his machine. That would completely defeat the purpose. His machine is slightly different than mine. His profile has got, it's unique to his machine, right? Everybody's is going to be unique, and that's how this whole profiling system works, okay? So if we get through all of this, I'm going to go back to working spaces in just a second. I just want to show you how this works. So this is kind of the system that we need. This is color managed workflow at its best. So we're going to start on the left-hand side with a camera profile. And if you can profile your camera, and we're going to build a profile for our cameras here today. If you can profile your camera, because your camera, again, it's a device. The color that it interprets is perverted, slightly. So if we can measure that deviation from what it should be and generate a profile for it, then we can actually bring color into a computer world, into Photoshop or whatever space we're working in, we can bring it in there and the color will actually then be neutralized and predictable. And if no matter how many different cameras that I shoot with, if I'm shooting the exact same thing and I have each one of those cameras profiled, what ultimately comes into my computer should look identical. Does that make sense? So in our first situation here, and this works with scanners as well, but we're going to generate a camera profile. The camera profile actually brings, does the correction to coming into your input software, whether that's C1 Pro, whether that's ViewScan, whether that's Adobe Camera Raw, whether that's Bibble, whatever you're using to actually get the raw data into your camera. That then passes that color information into Photoshop. Photoshop is unique in this way. Photoshop, the working spaces, and again, they're these same three-dimensional spaces. You just saw Adobe RGB in the color sync utility. You just saw what that color space actually looked like. Those spaces inside of Photoshop are mathematical. They are theoretical. They are exactly the same on everybody's machine. They are not device dependent. Adobe RGB on my computer is the same as it is on Zach's, is on Lisa's, John. Those Adobe RGB spaces, ProPhoto is another color space, whatever, they are theoretical mathematical spaces. And the reason that's important to us is that when I trade a file, I give one of my files to Katie. She opens it up in her Photoshop. Her Photoshop Adobe RGB working space is identical to mine. Her monitor isn't, but Adobe RGB space is. Then when she goes to look at it on her monitor, the monitor profile that she built will then take that color and change it so that her monitor looks exactly like my monitor. Does this make sense? Are there questions about this? Yes?
Slightly different, but I don't understand why you have to continuously calibrate your monitor if the monitor is in the exact same environment and nothing's changed.
Because monitors age.
Really, it
Oh my God, yes. I've told everybody this, or who's actually gone through this before, but if you work for Disney's Pixar Studios, if you don't calibrate your monitor every single morning, you're fired. They don't reprimand you, they just let you go. It's not an option for them. Monitors drift, they get older, the phosphors age. You know, can you work on a monitor indefinitely? You can't. They lose brightness. I mean, all sorts of things happen to them. So does this make sense what we're going for here? So this is the setup here in our color managed workflow. This is what we're going to be going for here. We're going to build a camera profile so that our camera is taken out of the equation. So, however, the camera that we're going to profile one of my files. The sensor that I have in that camera is highly sensitive. It's hypersensitive to blues. So it actually, the blues end up appearing lighter than they're supposed to be. So the camera profile understands that and it takes that additional blue brightness out and it neutralizes that color. If I do that for all of my cameras, then whatever discrepancy or deficiency or hypersensitivity one of my cameras has is removed from the equation. Make sense? Same thing with my monitor. If I have a profile for my monitor, then all the information that comes out here is neutralized. So that it's not just neutralized in the sense that it's color balanced. It's these deficiencies that you run into. That's what's the issue here. Does this make sense? And then finally, if I do the very same system for a printer, in theory, all of these colors should actually match one another. We have removed the device dependence out of the equation. Make sense? So I'm going to show you, let me see if there's one last thing in here. Color temperatures. Anybody in this room not really understand the concept of color temperature? You're all good on this one? All right, well, at the very least, know this. As the color temperatures are cooler down in the range of the 2500 to 3000 in this range right here, it's about the color temperature of tungsten lights. So if you were to use these lights on here, turn them on and measure them in color temperature. We actually do measure and do color correction in this class using color meters. Has anybody in this class ever used a color meter? Yep, that will change. That's exciting, right? And then as you start to get up here in the really higher end, this area up in here in the 10,000 range of temperature, color range, whatever, this is sort of like the color that you get of absolutely clear sky on the top of Mount Everest. Really high up, blue sky, whatever. starts to be extremely blue, though, because the amount of blue in the sky tends to be really intense. Somewhere right here in the middle area, roughly in the middle, right around 6,500 degrees Kelvin, the blue, because these are complementary colors of one another, they counteract each other, and you actually end up with a neutral gray. And that's going to matter to us because it is what we're going to use to calibrate this monitor. Are there any questions about this? All right, so we are going to calibrate a monitor. How many people in this room have never calibrated a monitor? Okay, good. So then there's a reason for you to see this. This should be job one, number one, when you walk into a photo studio. Most photographers don't do this because most photographers are stupid. They don't calibrate their monitors, yet they make all these value judgments on their computers based on color. Oh, that's too blue, or oh, brightness, that's too hot, that's overexposed. You can use numbers to make that value judgment to see if it really is or not, but again, most photographers are just way too stupid. So this is a color calibrator. They have them here at the studio. My suggestion to you is if you really care about your color, you should be thinking, here in a shooting, you should go through this process. It should be the first thing that you do before you build a session, before you do anything else. You should be doing this. Just a word. They also have these in the lab. You can check these out to do your own machines at home. How often should you color calibrate? My suggestion to you is this. Most people would agree with this as well. For most people, you would color calibrate, I would say at least once a month, at least, minimum. Probably every 2 weeks is a better call, but certainly if you are doing color correct work, color specific work, you should be calibrating that morning. So do you need to be working on a color calibrated monitor type email? You don't. But if you are doing color correction work in Photoshop and you're actually trying to make values based on what you are seeing on your screen, if you haven't calibrated, you are guessing at best. So I'm going to plug this guy in. So anyway, there is software that comes in this package as well, although it doesn't seem to be in this one. So, but you can download the software from X-Rite. It's a good idea that if you do because there's a little jump drive with the ones in the digital lab. If you use that software, it's a really good idea to actually check for an update, see if there's actually been an update to the software. Download. You should be working with the most recent version of the software is all I'm trying to say. It's a program called i1 Profiler, so it's right here. We're actually going to go through this. There it is. So you double click this guy. Again, this is the puck that we're using. This thing will open up. Mine's set to actually check for updates. And then you have options here, which you can actually profile. In your case, you're really only interested in doing your display. That's what we're going to do. That's this monitor. When I click on display, you'll actually see that I have two different options. I've got this color LCD, but I've also got this Epson, because I could profile that Epson projector, but that's why this is actually set like this. I'm going to do my monitor, so I'm actually going to click on this monitor like this. I'm going to see if I can scooch this guy over. Yeah. So I'm going to do my monitor right here. There's a drop-down menu here that you would only change if you had a really specific type of monitor. So for instance, if you have the latest, greatest OLED monitor, you would actually click on this and come down and pick OLED. But in your case, for pretty much every monitor, if you're working on a Mac or an IBM PC, any laptop, it's going to be this white LED. You would just leave this point right here. In terms of white point, what you need to understand is this, that you need to tell this software what it is you're really looking for. In terms of the white point, what you are looking for here is a CIE illuminant of D65. What does D65 stand for? Daylight. 6,500 degrees Kelvin. That's what this stands for. That is this point on that color temperature chart I just showed you that is neutral gray. So we're telling this. You could profile or calibrate your monitor to different white points for different reasons, but that's way beyond the scope of this class. Suffice it to say, in 99.9% of the time, you would want D65. Do not leave this as native. That is a huge mistake. Set this at D65. For the luminance value here, you want to set the luminance value here between 120 and 160 candelas per meter square. This is the brightness of your monitor. What sets the black point of your monitor? What sets the white point? This is how you set the brightness of your monitor. You can't guess at how bright it should be. You should be setting this value of 120 to 160. A lot of laptops, this software actually expects 120 to be the norm. My monitor at home, it's 140. It's a slight variation of the two. You usually will never be able to get this exactly on the money, but you need to get as close as you can possibly get to this. And it's really how bright your monitor is. The next thing down here is the tone response curve. You want to leave this at standard. And then this gamma, the default setting on this gamma, this is the contrast of your monitor. You would want to set the contrast of your monitor at 2.2. That is the given standard now. There used to be debate about this, but that debate's pretty much dead now. Everybody does this 2.2. Finally, down here, you've got an option to actually have your profile automatically adjust depending on the ambient light in the room. What the profile will do is it'll use the camera on your computer to measure the available light in the room, and it'll change the profile based on that accordingly. This is the most stupid, ridiculous thing in the whole wide world. You're saying, I want to shut down all my variables. I want to eliminate all the possibility of fluctuation change. However, I want to click this button so that every time I turn this on or use it, it changes, which means your profile will change when you put on your white shirt. Is your image changing when you put on a white shirt? No. Why should your profile be changing? So everybody thinks, okay, well, I've turned it off here. That's good to go. I'm solid. There's no more problem, right? Well, you do still have a huge problem. Now, I'm not going to be able to show it to you on this because I don't want to quit this program really quick. So everybody can look at Alicia. Can everybody see her screen right here? Oh, I can see it on there. Oh, yeah. Do just the little Apple menu. Click on that guy. Come down to System Preferences, and then click on Displays. See this little checkbox right here that says automatically adjust the brightness of your monitor? That's the other place you can fuck up your profiles. You need to make sure that that's turned off, because what that's doing is it's changing the response of your monitor depending on how bright the room is. So you want to make sure, did everybody see that? You want to make sure that that is turned off in both places. So once that's turned off in both places, you simply hit the next button, and you will get this screen that comes up, and it's going to show you exactly what we were talking about right here. And you click on Start Measurement, and it will walk you through the process. So it's going to tell you to take this little thing. It even blinks, saying, hey, it's me now, do this. And if you look at the illustration, what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to lift the protective cap up off of this. It doesn't completely come off. It just comes up a little bit. And then turn it around to reveal the lens that actually is going to do the measuring on this. There's a counterweight on the other side that you put on the back of your screen that'll hold this thing to the screen. You also want to tilt your screen back slightly. So I'm putting the lens part on here, tilting the screen back slightly, just like it says in the instructions right there, because if you have your screen tilted forward, that's not going to do a very good job of measuring your screen, is it? Tilted back, in the middle, and then hit the next arrow right here. Oh, somewhere over here, and it's outside of my screen because my screen is actually trying to do my monitor. It's saying, is your screen set up like this? So on your alls, when you do this, you'll see there's an OK button that you can't see on mine, but it's right here. So you click OK, and then the next arrow will go. So you're going to click on the next arrow, and this is actually going to now start the calibration part. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to try to measure the brightness of my screen. So I said the target of my screen was 120 candelas. You can see on this that my measured luminance on this is 75. My screen is not bright enough. So unfortunately, on the Macintosh world, you actually have to use the little brightness buttons on here, which are ridiculous, but nonetheless, the bigger sun, how exacting is that? And you hit that once, and you'll see it'll remeasure. It's now a luminance of 94. Click it to get brighter. That's now a luminance of 116. That's getting very close. Hit it one more time, and it's going to go over 137. It's up to 141. Now, that's actually where I prefer to have my brightness, because that matches the same brightness I use on my monitor at home. But in your case, if you're shooting for this 120, you're going to have to come back down because 116 is actually closer. However, how bright is my monitor? what you've got to do is, if you look at my screen right here, every time I hit this, you'll see there's a number of bars. You got to count those little number of white bars. You could take a picture of it. That's a great call. Thank you. Brilliant. Take a picture when you get to the right so you know the number of bars, and then every time you care about using your profile, you have got to set your brightness on your screen to those little number of bars. That's so brilliant, because that's with you like forever. Genius. See, I get so much from you guys as well. Anyway, that's just fucking brilliant. All right, so I'm going to hit next anyway. So the first thing, this is a two-step process with monitor work. The first is it's going to actually try to calibrate my monitor. And what I mean by that is it's going to try to get my monitor to truly give me a white point of D65 and a contrast rating of 2.2. That's going to happen in the software. Then it's going to go through the whole process a second time to measure how good or bad my monitor is now responding. Any discrepancies, when it's asking for that pure red, is my monitor giving it a pure red, or is it giving it something else? Does that make sense? So you'll see it go through this whole thing right now. So, and it says approximately 2 minutes, like all software. They have no idea. Nobody has, I don't think any software developer ever had a watch. Because doesn't this always happen to you? 10 seconds left to copying, right? And 20 minutes later, 5 seconds left. All right, and you can see what's happening. It's kicking out all these colors. These are known colors to the software. The puck is actually measuring what my monitor is giving it. It's saying, okay, you're asking for this color. Am I giving you this color? Oh, you're asking for this color. Is it that color? It's that whole chart that we saw earlier. Up. So, in the morning, when you get to the studio, first question out of your mouth as a digital tech to the photographer or the crew or whatever, has this monitor been calibrated? Do you want me to recalibrate this monitor? If you're working at a rental house or rental studio, do you guys calibrate your monitors? Are these monitors calibrated? When was the last time this thing was calibrated? You can find out. I'll show you where you find out in just a second. So that when they lie to you about it, you'll know. Oh, again, it's just another thing. By the way, I just looked. Your monitor hasn't been calibrated in 6 days. Should we calibrate it? Don't you think we should calibrate it?
I think I asked this before, but what if they don't have the hardware to calibrate the monitor?
Then you've got to say to them, then you have absolutely no, you cannot be relying on what it is you're seeing on your monitor, because you can't. You can't be making any, that's when your number sense takes over. So it's gone through the process. It says, now, okay, take the thing off and return it, put the little protective cover back on it and close it up. As soon as that happens, it understands that's happened now, and it says to go ahead and hit next. Look at my befores and afters. If you look at this chart right here, the color on the bottom is the color that was asked for. The color on the top is the color that my monitor gave it. Does anybody see a problem here? Look at how different these are. Look at how off this is. Look at, I mean, the discrepancies here. Now, reds are actually pretty close. Now, purples are, you know, a little bit better. But look at the difference here in the yellows. This is frightening. Up there, and the blue is pretty consistent, but look at this in here. Completely, these are all before and after colors within the same square. What was asked for and what was measured? There is no way I can do color work on this monitor that's that bad. But my profile now understands all of these problems. So in the case when this color right here is being asked for, and this is what's coming out, this profile changes the way my monitor shows and actually shows me the color that was being asked for. Does that make sense? Okay, so finally in this, we're going to say, okay, this is great. I don't need to do the measurement again. I'm simply going to say next. And here we get the chance to save the profile. You need to name these profiles with something that makes sense to you. Color LCD doesn't mean a thing. What does make sense is Verser _ MacBook, M-A-C-B-O-O-K, Pro, underscore 20161001. That makes sense. I know what this is. It says right now that you cannot write this to the system level. It's fine. It's only going to work for a user. So whatever you're logged in, I'm logged in as Verser Engelhard. So this profile will not be available to me in my Capture One login space. I would have to do this again in that login space to have this be available to me. Profile reminder is just a thing that you can say once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever. Remind me that I need to profile again. Again, another place, this is that same thing, the ambient light monitoring. You want to make sure that this thing is turned off because this thing will build an auto adjust into your profile. And finally say create and save profile. It'll go through this process and it'll say now you can compare and we're good to go. This whole thing has done its work. You can quit this now. I need everybody to come over here and look at my computer screen. I can't show you to this on this because this will show what I show you on this screen will be this screen's profile. It won't be the one for my laptop. So I want you to see the one for my laptop. So when I said to you, you can actually find out when the last time that your computer was actually profiled. If you, again, you come up to the system preferences, down up to the Apple menu, down to system preferences, this thing opens up. You want to look for the displays. It's this guy right here. I'm going to have two of these. Again, one is for my built-in display, this monitor right here. The other one here is for that Epson projector. But I'm looking at this guy right here. If you then click on color, it will give you a list of these profiles right here. It'll actually show this is all the ones that are available for this monitor. And it looks like my computer just lost it. Okay, here's the possible ones right here. The one that we just made has been installed and it's picked for me, and you can see it's this one right here. You can see I make a lot of them for this machine. This is the latest one right here. You can tell by the date. If you click on Open Profile right here, it will actually open it up, and you're thinking, oh my God, it opened it up. Look at the space here. You can see right here, it's creation date right here. So anytime that you go into a studio, if you go through these steps, they're going to look at you like you're from Mars and go, John, what are you doing? What? And you go, hey man, I know my shit so well. I'm just checking to make sure that this thing has been done. Yeah, hey dude. No, make sure that this thing has been done reasonably, that this has been okay. I can see there was a display, there was a profile that was created for this display this morning. So there's a good chance that this thing has been calibrated. I get this. If you're looking at this and it says, 1998, that's a huge problem, right? And then you say that and they go, oh my God, yeah, we should probably calibrate this thing.
Why did it get the time wrong? It said 4:25.
Oh, it's probably, who knows? But at any rate, we're close enough. So anyway, that's how, but this is the other thing I want to show you. This is the thing I wanted everybody to see here. See this color LCD up here? This is the one that actually comes with an Apple. This is the one that Apple puts on this for us. They create one for you, and this is what it looks like. Anybody see any difference there? This is a calibrated environment. Calibrated. Apple. So not only were all of those colors so radically off, the whole color display here, typically a laptop is sent out of Apple with a color temperature or white point of somewhere between 9 and 10,000 degrees Kelvin. It's so fucking blue it'll kill your eyes. And the reason they do that is it makes your monitor seem really bright. And it makes your photos seem really bright. Also makes your photos seem really blue. And because your photos are really blue, you go into Photoshop and you start pumping in a whole lot of red to get rid of the blue. And then you go to print out your print, and your print's really red because you pumped in all that red. The problem wasn't your file. The problem was the monitor was lying to you. Are there questions about this?
Do you still have the profile that you made in class last week?
Yes, actually all of these. So this was done, this one was done 2 days ago. Slightly different in brightness.
Yeah.
It's probably, again, the brightness, the luminosity was either set at that 120 or, but I'm not as concerned about that small amount of jump as I am about the color. Okay, everybody jump back on their computers really quick. We're now going to do the one for your camera. So What we have done now is, if we go back and we look at our color managed workflow chart, so this is what we've done. We have now done this part of it. This monitor profile has been built. So if we did this to every single monitor here, any file that I've got in an Adobe RGB working space, again, this is theoretical, mathematical space. They're identical on every single one of these machines. And the beauty of that is that files that are changed, that are handed off, and I give Zach my file, it's coming into his Adobe RGB or ProPhoto, or sRGB, whichever one he's using, is identical to the one that's on my machine. So the shift that's going out to the monitor happens. Ours are all identical. Everybody's information in here is identical, theoretical, mathematical, working space. However, the change for each and every monitor is unique, and therefore, if we each have our own unique profile for our monitor, then that part of the problem has been removed from this. What I want to do now, though, is take care of this problem, the camera problem, because every single camera is going to also shoot this exact same thing. If you have two cameras shooting the exact same scene, they will give you two different files, and we need to take care of that difference. So to do that part, I gave you guys a file, or you should have downloaded a file, and the one you should have downloaded, let me find mine really quick. It should be this one. Do you guys have that file? The CR2 file? Everybody got that? Just double click on it to launch it. It'll open up into Camera Raw. So the thing that we need to actually use to actually, yeah, what you downloaded should be in your download folder. So what you've got here is, again, is a file that I've actually created. The software programs, both the programs that we've got to do this, work on DNGs. They don't work on a Canon RAW file or a Nikon RAW file. So we need to make a DNG copy of this file. In order to do that, you simply click on Save Image. It's down here in the lower left-hand corner. If you click on that Save Image, a dialog box will open up, and this tells Photoshop, or it tells Camera Raw, what you want done and where to do it. And so if you change nothing on this, by default, it should say that it's going to save this new file in the same location that your original one came from, which is what you want it to do. If for some reason you wanted to put it someplace else, you can do that by selecting the folder here. It's also going to change the file naming convention only by its extension. This is why file naming is so important to us, is that the only difference in the file that I'm going to have now is it's going, instead of being a CR2 file, which is a Canon RAW file, it's going to be a DNG file, which is an Adobe RAW file. The naming convention will be the same, so I will know that this is exactly the same file that I created that was that CR2 file. It's just the Adobe version of it. So if you leave document name, that's what it'll cause. The file extension here, you'll notice if you click on this drop down that you can actually build different kinds of files. We do want this to be a DNG. You'll also notice that you have the possibility of using small case or caps in this. The small case is the one that you want to use, and the reason they give you this option, again, is this whole server storage issue thing. They don't want a bunch of people. They want to give everybody the option of using small lowercase TIFF if you were making a TIFF instead of the uppercase. They do it for every single option here, and that is why it's that whole Unix server issue. But anyway, we want to make a DNG. That's what we're looking for, and that's the format that we're going to do in. And then you simply hit Save. And right down here, you'll see a little spinning thing. It goes pretty fast because it just did that conversion. This has now been done. You can hit cancel out of this. We're not going to actually work with that CR2 quite yet. Go back into the Finder, and when you look back right wherever your CR2 was when you did this, if you didn't move it out of the download folder, this will be in there. Right underneath it, you should see the DNG that we just created. This is where mine is. Does everybody have theirs? Okay. I gave you a piece of software along with that. I gave you actually two pieces of software. One piece of software is called the Color Passport Checker. Does everybody see that? Do you guys all have that?
Sorry, I had to re-download the image.
Okay.
So it's not a DNG yet.
Okay.
You just did that in Camera Raw, right?
That's all I did, yeah. Is it downloaded yet? Did the software download as well? Oh, it says it's an unknown developer. Then come up to the Apple, the little Apple menu. Come down to System Preferences. Click on Security and Privacy, and oh, you guys can't unlock these machines. Is yours locked? Click on the lock and see if it asks. See what it asks for. What's the username? Oh, it's empty. Type in yes and try yes. Try yes for the password and username. It didn't work. Okay. Yours work?
Yeah, mine worked for you.
Oh, well, yeah, yours work because yours aren't locked. Anyway, this is where you would unlock that part. We'll go at it a different way. Click on instead of the color passport checker software, try the, hang on one second. Oh, shit. What was that? Instead, click on the DNG profile editor. Does that open?
Oh, wait. Yeah.
DNG profile editor opens? Yeah, okay, we'll do it in that one. Both these programs do the exact same thing. They do it slightly different way. I strongly suggest if you're doing this on your home machines that you try both ways of doing it. This is the one that Adobe uses. It's the one they make and the one they use. So to use this guy, we need to load that DNG first. So come up to the File menu, down to Open DNG Image, and then you need to navigate to wherever that DNG image was. The one that you just made. You need to go in and find it. And click Open. And it'll open this up in a different window. Does anybody not have this window open? We're all good? Okay. With this window open, come over to, you'll see at the top, you've got two windows really right now. You've got this thing, it's called Untitled Recipe, and another thing, it's got your image file. There's tabs at the top of this guy. You need to come to the last tab and click on Chart. And when you do that, you'll see it throws up 4 color patches on your image. These are movable, and you need to click and you need to drag them so that they're sort of on top of the color checker chart that's down here at the bottom. We're going to zoom in, but you need to move these guys first. So click, and you'll look up at my screen. You can see where mine are. They're really close to this right now. Then you can click on this drop-down menu down here and go to 100%, and it'll zoom in. And you can actually see. We even need to get a little bit bigger. So I'm going to drag my window open so I can see a little bit more. But my color samples are close. And I'm going to go to 200%. And again, make my screen a little bit larger so that I can see all of those color points. And you need to click on the white one and drop it on the white patch. The black one, drop it on the black patch. Then I'm just holding down the space bar to get the hand to move my tool around. Grab the brown and drag it down and put it on the brown patch, and the turquoise and put it down on the turquoise patch. And you should be zoomed in like this, because you really, if those circles, your circles are too big and they start hitting some of the edge of this or the border of this, it'll give you a really bad profile. So that part's been done. Is everybody good with this so far? Okay, so then come back to the thing that says chart. You click back into this guy right now. And in this, you can actually develop a whole different series of color tables. You can build a single profile that will work for both lighting setups, or you can be more specific about it. If you click on this drop-down menu, you have two options. You have the 2,850 degrees Kelvin, which is basically the profile that you would make if the lighting in your scene was primarily tungsten light. If it is daylight, which mine is, you use this 6,500 degrees Kelvin, and that's the one you would actually select. I make these color profiles for every lighting camera combination that I do. You can use a profile that you made So if I'm shooting with the very same camera, I can use a profile that I generated for that camera that's under a slightly different lighting situation. It won't be as precise as generating the one under the exact lighting situation that I'm using, but it'll be very, very close. Some people make one profile for their camera, because this is really more about the sensor in your camera than anything else. They'll make it for that camera, and then that's all they'll use. In my case, I do it for because it's so easy to do. So at any rate, once you get those on there, you say D65 only, click on Create Color Table, and you should get this message that says the color table was successfully created. You can click OK to that, and you'll see, if you move your image out of the way, you will again see a whole series of before and after color images. This is exactly what we did using the color monitoring software. The color patches on that color passport checker are known values. The software has read these known values, and it's measured the discrepancy. That discrepancy is due to the response of my camera. Make sense? So the last thing we're going to do is actually generate the camera calibration profile for this. So if you come up to the File menu, you will see you have an option here of saving recipes. That is not what you want to do. Saving a recipe merely saves the information that has been loaded in this DNG profile editor. That is not the profile. That's just what's going on here. Nobody ever saves their recipes. What you simply want to do instead is export this Canon profile. So if you come down, File menu, down to Export Canon, a dialog box will open up. You need to slide this guy out of the way enough that you can read the name of the lighting of your camera situation. You don't care that this is a Canon EOS 5D Mark II. What you care, so you need to hit the delete key to get rid of that name. You need to type in the name of your shooting. So my shooting was 20110917 underscore COL underscore fashion. And then in my case, because that's enough of the file information, I'll be able to know that that's the shooting that it was for. You could, at this stage of the game, put in your 5D Mark II, but that's not what we're going to do here. Although this got rid of my code on this, so I don't know if this is going to, we'll see where this ends up saving it. On my case, I'm actually going to put my name in front of this, or I'm going to put latest. I built 1,000 of these, so I need to be able to find this profile. I'll put in a bunch of these. That's what I'll do. Okay. You don't need to do that. I just need to separate this from the 300 other versions of this very same profile that I've created. In terms of where this thing gets put, it should say Camera Profiles right here. If you click on this drop-down menu, you will see exactly where that is. It is in your user library in Application Support under Adobe, under Camera Raw in the Profiles folder. That is the path to where this thing needs to go. And then simply hit Save. It's going to say this thing was exported successfully, and you can say OK, and you can now quit this program. So up to DNG and quit this. You do not need to save the recipe. That was not your profile. That was just what was going on here in the DNG profile editor space. Then go back to that original CR2 file, not the DNG guy. As a matter of fact, the DNG guy, you can throw it away. It's done its work. I want to go back to the raw CR2 file, the one that we started with here in the beginning. Double click on him. It'll bring it open into Photoshop again. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on this so I can get into my color target a little bit closer. I'm going to white balance this thing first. So I'm going to come up to the white balance tool. Again, it's the third one along the very top, the white balance tool. I'm going to select that. I'm going to come down and I'm going to click on the little gray patch that's right next to the red one. And then I want to use this profile, the thing that I just made. In order to use it, if you look at the series of icons that are right underneath the histogram, there's one that looks like a little camera. If you click on that camera, it'll drop down. This is the this is the camera calibration window. And you'll see right here under Camera Profile, it's got Adobe Standard. What Adobe did was they went out and they bought 10 models of every camera known to exist. They did this exact same thing that we are doing right now on all 10 of those. They averaged the results of all 10 of those together, and that became the Adobe Standard. So Adobe actually knows which camera you're using, and you can actually see it's right down here. It knows that it was an EOS 5D Mark II. How does it know that? Exactly, the metadata. It just reads the metadata. It knows. And therefore, this Adobe standard was the one that Adobe made with these 10 EOS 5D Mark II cameras. However, we've just said that the problem with all of this is that every single one of those sensors, every single one is slightly different. So we're making one specific to my camera in this lighting setup. To use it, if you click on the drop-down menu right here, you should be able to find it. And hopefully you guys found yours. Oh, there's mine right here. Remember I said I put a bunch of these. Did you guys see yours? So click on yours. Did you see anything change? Click back on Adobe Standard. Look what happens to the sweater. Are you kidding me? Zoom in even closer, just to the card. Now go back and forth between Adobe Standard. And before you let go, go back to Adobe Standard. Specifically look at the blues and the purples. And the reds. Notice anything change? How the fuck do you do that on your own? You don't. You can't. So, is this working for everybody? Is this not working for anybody? Canceling out of this. You would then go ahead and open it into Photoshop. And again, we have now taken care of this part of the equation. So, I have now got my camera profile that takes care of any weirdness of my sensor to give me the exact same color as any other camera that has also been profiled. All of those cameras in the world, if they've been profiled correctly, should then be giving me the exact same color information into Adobe Camera Raw. This thing goes into Photoshop theoretical working space, that everybody's is the same. So this is the place where all files are exchanged. This is how I can give you a copy of my file. Because it is in this space, and this is a mathematical space that is not device dependent, I'm giving you an unambiguous file. You are profiling your monitor and using it in a calibrated environment, so you are looking at the same thing that I'm looking at, because we are both looking at profiled monitors. And then finally, when you go to actually do your output, if you profile your printers, all of your printers should actually be responding in the exact same way, so that what you get out of an Epson 4900 on this machine with this setup here is the same as the Epson 4900 that Katie has at her home. Does that make sense? Are there questions about this? Yes.
So, how do you, you can use batch processing with this inside of Camera Raw, right? If you have the sample and you have a bunch of images,
sure,
you can apply the profile on.
Yes.
Then, during the progress of the shoot, is there a situation that would cause you to want to use different sample images with the color checker?
Well, in a typical lighting situation, when I'm out, or even in the studio, when I do another shot, a different shot, and I change my lighting, the lights are essentially the same, but what I'm doing with them would change. So again, I would use a different color checker for that to check my exposure, and I would use that to balance my white balance my color. But what you'll see in this situation is that, and this is sort of an interesting thing, maybe this will answer part of your question. If we go back, I'm going to open that guy one more time. If you're still in Camera Raw, great. So I'm going to open this up, and I'm going to zoom in onto this guy. And again, I'm going to color correct this first. So click on this. I'm going to color balance right here. And what I'm getting on my color balance here is 196, 197, 197. So, and that is with an Adobe Standard. It goes back to Adobe Standard. When I change this thing, my color balance is not changed at all. My white balance didn't change at all, but the color radically changed. Again, this is a response of my sensor. This is not white balancing. White balancing I'm still going to need to do. This is not taking care of that. This is taking care of the fact that my particular sensor in this camera is too sensitive to blue. That's what's happening. And I know it's too sensitive to blue when I use it, because look at this blue patch right here. This is the Adobe Standard version of it. And you see how light this is. My camera it's too sensitive to blue, so when a certain amount of light hits it, it's making the blue brighter than it should be. It shouldn't be that bright. It should be darker, but my sensor's too sensitive. When I correct for that, the blue is made darker, but my white balance has not changed one iota. Two completely different issues. Okay, we have got a half an hour to complete the end of this piece of the puzzle. Are you guys up for this? We've got to run to the digital lab to do the last part. So pack it up here. Let's see if we can't get this done. Sure.
So we're doing the printer profiling, right?
Yes.